Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Joe Tyrrell and welcome back to The Runoff, the GP Blog podcast. The 2022 season is underway and it was Ferrari who kicked it off in style, securing a first 1-2 since Singapore in 2019. It was despair for Red Bull as they suffered a double retirement in the last few laps. Over the course of this episode, myself, Cameron and Toby will be breaking down the season opener and looking ahead to next week's Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. This is the 2022 season, episode 2. Cameron, Toby, we've just had a chance to take in the entire Bahrain Grand Prix. How are you both doing? And it was a pretty special season opener.
I'm all good, thank you, Joe. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Toby. And Cam, yourself?
Yeah, pretty good, thanks, mate. Just recovering from the first race, which I think was eventful, to say the least, I think.
Well, it was certainly eventful. It's been an eventful weekend all round, to be honest. What did you make of the race, lads? I felt it was thrilling at the start, a bit flat in the middle, and then it was an absolutely incredible end.
Yeah, I think that's what we mentioned before we started recording this. We kind of said how the start was good, and then you mentioned, Joe, that it started to tail out a bit, and then obviously Pierre Gasly's car set alight, which I don't think anyone saw coming. I was just looking at my phone, I looked up, and then all of a sudden I see a car in flames. So I was kind of reminiscent of Bahrain again a couple of years ago for Grosjean, but luckily it wasn't as bad. Well, obviously it wasn't as bad at all because it wasn't a crash. After that, the restart, the action kind of came back in and the end was tense, which kind of reignited the goodness of the start.
Cam, what did you make of it?
Yeah, I echo what Toby said. I think the start was always going to be intriguing no matter what happened, really, just because of the new regulations, new season. I think it's always something to look forward to. And I think the start was exciting. I think Valtteri Bottas did typical Valtteri Bottas things of another poor start, which he'll be disappointed with, recovered in the end. That was just one thing I noted from the start. But yeah, I think the ending especially was excellent. I think Charles Leclerc deserves big praise for how he handled that restart after the Gasly crash. The Gasly DNF, I should say. I think he handled that restart as well as he could have. I think that Red Bull looked quick in a straight line, and he fended off Max Verstappen with ease and put him into the clutches of his teammate Carlos Sainz rather than sort of being under pressure to attack himself.
Well, if you haven't seen the race already, spoilers, because there will be in this episode. Ferrari 1-2, the first since Singapore in 2019. Their first win since Singapore in 2019. It's a really great weekend for them, and it's great to see them competing at the top, isn't it, Cam?
Yeah, definitely. I think Ferrari belong at the top of the sport, and they're back there now. Last year, it was hesitant. They're back after a couple of pole positions and sort of fighting for podiums, but now they are where they belong, or at least where they feel they belong. And I think it's good for the sport. I think, call it, you want new teams at the front, and obviously Ferrari have always been there, but it is good to see them back there, and I think they deserve to be there. They've clearly got a great drive lineup, and they've clearly got a great car underneath them.
Toby, do you think the same? Are they finally back this time?
Yeah, it seems to be. I think people were kind of highlighting the driver pairing last season, but obviously their car wasn't as good enough as Red Bull or Mercedes, so they weren't able to compete at the top of each race. But like Cam said there, with the car they've got, it looks as though they are back and will be fighting for a championship this year.
Yeah, it's really good to see Ferrari at the top end of the grid. And there seems to be a real positive energy around the team in general. One team that won't have such a positive energy is Red Bull. It was a nightmare for them, but we'll come on to them a little more later on. But I just want to get your initial reactions to their performance. It seemed a pretty good weekend up until that double DNF.
Yeah, it was all going so well until you kind of heard Verstappen chatting back to his race engineer, and then people started wondering what was going on. And I still think people don't really know what happened. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out when they kind of have their race debrief and see really what happened with the car. I believe it was something to do with his steering at a point, and then Perez's engine maybe cocked out or something. That's what Karun Chandok said. So, I mean, it was going so well, and it looked as though they were going to get really good points, and Verstappen was going to get podium. Perez was probably going to finish fourth, so they would have been second in the constructors, which would have been a great position for them to start, seeing as Ferrari did just have that little edge. But now they've got nothing, so it's a bit of a stinker for them.
Cam, should Red Bull maybe be worried about their reliability issues? Because 3 of their 4 powered cars have retired within the space of 10 laps, and they looked like they were the best team on the grid up until qualifying yesterday. Is there cause for concern, and do you think they might have to tone down some of the engine performance in order to gain back that reliability?
It's certainly a concern, because not only having 3 of your 4 engine-powered cars retire is obviously an issue to start with, but there was no real indication that it was ever going to happen, really. If you were thinking of reliability issues, you were thinking of someone like McLaren, who obviously had a poor race anyway, but they didn't retire their cars. Red Bull never looked like they had reliability issues. Never going into the race weekends, throughout testing, they didn't look like they were a team who could be struggling with engines or anything like that. So it is certainly a worry that this comes to the first race of the season. Both Red Bulls and an AlphaTauri haven't managed to complete the full race. So they'll certainly be looking into that. It'll be a quick turnaround before the Grand Prix next Sunday, but they've got to figure it out because it seems strange to have three of your cars go down and not finish the race.
Yeah, if Red Bull really are going to have to tone down their performance of their engine in return for reliability, it could really be to the benefit of Ferrari, who look to be the most consistent package on the grid, as almost expected, but it could be a great chance for them to build a lead and really establish themselves at the top. As for last year's Constructors' Championship winners, Mercedes, they came home P3 and P4, and they must be delighted with that performance, Toby.
Yeah, well, Hamilton and Russell both came into the weekend saying damage limitation, and they've come out of it with 27 points, which is more than enough, and it is not damage limitation at all. So in a sense, though, they were quite lucky because of Red Bull, basically their engines failing or whatever happened, but they would have finished behind both Verstappen and Perez, so they would be on, obviously not the same, no, they'd be on less points, but it's both of them drove well. I think Russell got a bit unlucky yesterday, but he still started from P9 and that's his fault, and to get up to P4, that's quite good. Hamilton had a very, very strong race the whole time. So like I said, 27 points, sitting now just only behind Ferrari. They'll be absolutely buzzing with that, I think.
It's still clear Mercedes have got a lot of work to do in terms of to get to the performance of Red Bull if they can master their reliability issues, and Ferrari, who seem far and away the best package on the grid. So it'll be interesting to see. There's only a week's turnaround, so it's not long for the team. So next week, we're probably expecting a similar setup. But before we get on to next week, let's go through our winners and losers of the Bahrain Grand Prix. Right, lads, there were plenty of winners and there were plenty of losers. But Toby, I'll come to you first. Give me your first winner.
So my first winner is a people's favourite, and it's Kevin Magnussen. I think you cannot fault anything he's done this weekend at all. He came in not really knowing what was going on, only had 2 days of testing, like minimal time, then came into this weekend, got into Q3, and now has finished P5 today and scored 10 points for Haas. And the big thing that stands out for me is when you look at the constructors table at the moment, Haas are third and Red Bull are at the bottom. And I don't think anyone would have predicted that coming into this weekend. And it's all thanks to Kevin Magnussen.
Certainly nobody would have predicted that, because given Haas's performance last season, they were awful. But they did put a lot of their eggs into this year because, well, they were so poor. It wasn't worth continuing where they were, was it, Cam?
No, last year Haas sort of just gave up, really. I think they said it from the start, from the get-go in 2021, that this year was their focus, and it's paid off. They've got a quick car, which is surprising, perhaps, but given how much attention and sort of effort they've put in it, maybe not so. And yeah, Kevin Magnussen absolutely smashed it this weekend. He looked quick throughout. The Haas looked quick. Mick Schumacher just missing out on points in P11. But yeah, Magnussen, full props to him. He looked quick, and fair play to him, because I wasn't expecting that quick. I didn't expect him to get up to speed that quickly. Let's just say that after a year out.
Yeah, Magnussen looks like he's got the bit between his teeth, to be fair, and he's got a point to prove, because after being dropped by Haas a year and a half ago now, he's come back, and he could have easily just sort of said, I'm in a Haas. It's not the best car on the grid. I'll just do what I can. But he's clearly come back with a point to prove, and he's doing brilliantly. He has been brilliant all weekend, but nobody saw this coming. So fair play to Kevin Magnussen. You're one of our winners this week, P5. That is a great result. Cam, I'll stick with you now for your first winner.
Yeah, potentially a little bit boring, but it's just Ferrari. I mean, we've got to talk about them just because of how sort of impressive. 1-2. Obviously, last season we had 1-2 the whole season, which is McLaren at Monza, and we've got one in the first race of this season. Ferrari absolutely smashed. They've clearly just hit the nail on the head with the regulations. They found the perfect formula, and with Red Bull struggling with reliability as they were in the first race, Ferrari have clearly taken a leap ahead. They clearly now look the best package. I mean, I wasn't expecting them to come in and put it on pole in the first race of the season. I was expecting Red Bull to do that, but Ferrari have done it. Leclerc drove an absolutely blind race, and Carlos Sainz, although he's a little bit way off his teammate, obviously pulled it back P2. can't really complain. So I think Ferrari would be absolutely delighted with how they start this season, and so they should be.
Ferrari really, really were immense. Fair play to them. It's clear, Toby, that them focusing on this season, last season, is, well, as it stands, it's looking like the right decision.
Yeah, I don't think you can fault them really, because they still did well last year, but obviously, like you said, they were focusing on this season more so. But I think now is their chance to really get going. You can see how well they performed today, and if next week, say Leclerc or Sainz win, and then the other gets a podium, and say Red Bull get on the podium as well, but Mercedes are a bit further back, then Mercedes and Red Bull are going to be fighting more so, and Red Bull will be able to just increase their lead. So getting a good start in the next, I'd say, 4 races. So getting as many points in the first 5 races of the season for Ferrari will be a priority in order to bridge a gap, and then they can try and hold on to that, which I think they probably could.
Yeah, one thing you do have to say is Ferrari are looking really good at the minute. But how much room for growth have they got? That'll be interesting to see over the course of the first 6 weeks and the entire season as a whole, because certainly Red Bull have got a really good package, but maybe haven't got that reliability. And Mercedes, well, they've not got the package as it stands. They're struggling with the porpoising. They're struggling with the engine power. So it'll be really interesting to see whether Mercedes in particular, whether as the season goes on, they can get back into contention. And they're not far off. It probably just needs a few things to go their way and they'll be back near the top of the grid. We'll move on to losers now. Some drivers, what I noticed was some drivers had absolute shockers in particular. And there was a group of them that just were awful all weekend, off the pace, didn't look good. The cars didn't look good. So Toby, I'll start with you. Who is your first loser?
I think we can only choose Red Bull. It's not necessarily their fault, but having 3 of their 4 drivers DNF says something. And I think although they performed well all weekend, the end result is they've got only 4 points from AlphaTauri, and obviously that's not even Red Bull, it's just their sister team. So there is literally nothing gained from this weekend apart from maybe a bit of a better understanding of their car and what went wrong. So I think you really just have to look at this from a Red Bull perspective and think, all right, on to the next. This has been a poor one, but you've just got to deal with it.
Cam, Red Bull, it was all right, to be fair for them, up until those last 10 laps. Then Verstappen, he has a habit, Verstappen, of saying how he has problems, and then he just sort of gets on with it, and there are no problems. But this time, this seriously was an issue. Is there a bigger concern for Red Bull, or is it as small as it just a bad day?
I think we'll find out next weekend, really. I think there's not really much you can do. I mean, doing full race distance is sort of the only way you can really test the reliability of your car. And they found out that on Sunday in Bahrain, that their car perhaps wasn't as reliable as they thought. Maybe it's a circuit thing. Maybe it's just a one-off. It's just unfortunate what happened to Perez and Verstappen and Gasly. So maybe it's something that we, and as the media and Red Bull themselves, won't even need to worry about. But I think it will be a concern for them. They'll be looking over the data thinking what went wrong, because it looked beforehand, it looked like it could be a really, really encouraging race. And Sergio Perez even looked like he could get third at one point. So Red Bull will be frustrated, I think, that a promising situation in terms of points has materialised in absolutely nothing.
It's interesting to see the contrasting emotions from, well, the absolute delight of Red Bull winning the World Championship in Abu Dhabi to just 3 months later, absolute despair, because, well, I think it sort of over the radio messages, Red Bull sounded a bit helpless, if I'm honest. It was a bit like, well, what do we do? Because we don't know what the problem, well, they knew what the problem is, but they weren't telling Max what the issue was. And then it just all went tits up, really, because 3 of their 4 drivers failed to finish. So it'll be interesting to see whether they have to sacrifice performance, but we'll wait and see. We've only got to wait 7 days because the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix is coming up. Toby, you wanted to give a special mention to Williams. They're not an official loser this week, but maybe slightly underwhelming for them.
Yeah, I mentioned them briefly before we start recording, mainly because of my prediction in our first episode, where I thought that they were the losers of pre-season testing. Albon finished 13th, Latifi finished 16th. Albon looked like maybe he could get something, but that's at a push, and Latifi was just out of the race for basically the whole thing. He was at the back with Mclaren the whole time, so it didn't really look good on his part. So I just think there was a bit of an expectation that maybe they would be a bit better. So that's why I'm saying, obviously Red Bull are the main losers, but in my mind, Williams were just underwhelming, and people maybe would have thought that they could have done a bit more this weekend.
One team which had a worse weekend than Williams and Red Bull is probably McLaren. Now, they were in the top 4 of teams to look out for this year in terms of that could maybe challenge for the title, but they're your big losers, Cam.
Yeah, definitely. I think obviously Red Bull, no points, no finishes, but McLaren was concerning. I mean, seeing McLaren right at the back of the grid is a sight we're not used to in recent years anyway. Yeah, Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo just didn't have any race pace. Obviously, the qualifying pace wasn't there on Saturday, and it was maybe an expectation that it would get slightly better in the race, but that just didn't materialise at all. And McLaren just not sure what it is from looking so good in Barcelona just to having no pace at all. They are, I mean, you look at the grid, and throughout the whole race, there was an obvious 6 drivers at the back from 3 teams. All 3 teams use a Mercedes power engine. All 3 teams use a Mercedes power unit, and it's worrying. It's concerning because Aston Martin, Williams, and McLaren looked way off the pace. They were the 6 drivers of those teams were the ones who had to unlap themselves in the safety car, and that was it. And they were clearly, there was a big divide between themselves and the rest of the grid, really. And McLaren were my losers just because of how good they were last year and what they promised for this year, really, especially in Barcelona tests. So concerning, very, very concerning for McLaren, who will need to sort of find a solution quickly, or this season could soon be over.
You mentioned there the Mercedes power unit. It's a stark contrast to what we saw last season, where Mercedes had the best power unit, you'd say, on the grid. Their teams, Williams, McLaren, Aston Martin, were all doing pretty well. And then this year, it's the opposite. Ferrari's engine has come through. Alfa Romeo, Haas are all doing really well. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops over the course of the season. One thing, lads, now we've got the winners and losers out of the way, one thing I want to touch on, lads, is the regulation changes. And have they improved racing? Obviously, we've got a very small sample size to look at. But from what you saw today, what do you make of the regulation changes and how have they impacted the racing?
The only main thing I could see was how close they were at the start, and how last season we'd kind of have probably the top 5 or 6 bridge a gap very early, and were able to get probably 10 seconds on 10th place backwards towards the back of the grid. But there was a battle from the start and the back, and I think that was the one thing that caught my eye. But the other was the DRS, and people were saying that they weren't sure how it would affect it, and I still think people are unsure. So I think we've got to wait for more races to be done so we can actually see kind of really how it's going to play out.
Cam, what did you make of it and how the new rules affected racing?
Yeah, I agree with the start thing. It looked slightly like a Formula 2 race, when you sort of complete a lap and you're back down on the pit straight. But other than that, I think it wasn't all too different from last year, really. I don't think we saw more overtaking. I think the battle between Leclerc and Verstappen that we had over consecutive laps was absolutely epic. I think that was brilliant, but it's the kind of thing we've seen before. Even last year, we've seen similar battles like that for the lead, or even with someone like Alonso and Hamilton when they had that battle of Hungary. So I think, I mean, I'm sort of certainly not sort of saying the regulations haven't worked or anything. We're one race in, so we can't really make too much of a judgment so far, but it didn't look like it was sort of like the aim of the regulations was to sort of bring the whole field closer together. And I still think that there was probably the same gap between first and last as there was last year. So I don't think that has changed wholeheartedly. So I'm not quite sure how well the regulations have worked. I think what it's done so far is nerf the Mercedes power unit.
Yeah, one thing I noticed is it didn't look as if the gap between the top 2 or 3 teams had got any smaller, but rather it bunched the midfield up. So the midfield was much more compact. I just remember seeing about 20 laps in, seeing from 20th up to probably about 11th or 12th, just all the cars in a line going round. It was interesting, the battle between Leclerc and Verstappen. That was probably a green tick for the regulation changes, but on the whole, I don't think we've got enough evidence yet to really make a judgment. So it'll be interesting to see on different tracks who benefits from the regulation changes and whether they have the effect that Liberty Media and the FIA and Formula One want them to have. Only time will tell, I guess. But moving on now to the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, which is coming up next weekend. Lads, last season's Saudi Arabian Grand Prix was, to put it lightly, carnage. Are we expecting more of the same this weekend?
Probably. Given the layout of the track, I think it wouldn't be a surprise to me at all if we have similar levels of sort of drama. Perhaps not Verstappen, Hamilton sort of crashing when Verstappen's trying to let Hamilton past type drama, but I think it will be more close racing. I think with the narrowness of the track, I think it promises to be an absolute thriller again.
Well, Cam mentioned Verstappen versus Hamilton at that track. Let me just quickly remind you of what happened last year. Hamilton and Verstappen went toe-to-toe. Hamilton accused Verstappen of brake checking him. Bottas pipped Ocon on the line, and all this was thrown amongst several safety cars. We are set, Toby, for a thrilling race with everything poised pretty nicely.
Yeah, I echo kind of the comments that you've made there. But the one thing that I remember was Verstappen, final corner of quali, been in it when he had, I know Cam mentioned before, jokingly 17 purple sectors, but it did feel like that because he was speeding round and he easily had pole position. So it'll be interesting to see how the cars or the new cars kind of work on that track, because obviously it was a new track last year, so we don't know it well enough, I think. But after this season opener, I think we can only be excited for next weekend.
Yeah, I'm really excited for next weekend. Saudi Arabia, the Jeddah, I think it's the Jeddah Corniche circuit. It was rapid, it was really quick, and it was really cool under the floodlights in Saudi Arabia. But one thing that Cam's already mentioned is the layout of the track is really, really narrow, and the cars last year were huge. Do you think this year we're going to see similar circumstances to what we found last year, where it was just too tight, and if any accident happens, it's going to cause chaos?
I think so. I believe the cars are even heavier this year, which means the braking is going to be a bit more of an issue. And with the circuit being so tight, margin for error is going to be even less. So I feel like if there's one little spin somewhere, it could cause a major pile up. So, I mean, this is all kind of just ideas that we're saying in our head, but there is a good chance it could happen, I think.
Well, lads, before we close off the show, I'll come to you. You did your predictions the other day, and unfortunately, Toby, your prediction for the Bahrain Grand Prix, a George Russell win, well, couldn't have been further from what happened. Cam, I can't remember who you picked. Was it a Verstappen win?
I did pick Verstappen,
It was a Verstappen win, and, well, that didn't happen either, and I picked Mercedes, so none of us were right, so it shows how much we know. But, lads, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, who are you going for?
I'm going to go for another Charles Leclerc win.
I'm going to be different. I'm going to say Verstappen again. Why not? I think that I just back Verstappen to win a race pretty soon.
I mean, Leclerc, Verstappen, they're both pretty safe picks. So I'd probably go with Leclerc. He seemed to have the pace, but Verstappen, if Red Bull can get their reliability sorted, then they've certainly got a fast car. But I'm sure we're in for a brilliant race. I can't wait. Well, lads, thank you for joining me for the second episode of The Runoff.
Thank you, Joe.
It's been my absolute pleasure. I hope you both enjoy your week. We'll see you next week for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix.
See you later.
See you there.